She's been swallowing pills for years, convinced she's sick, convinced the shadows moving in her peripheral vision are just symptoms of a broken mind. But tonight, when she takes one pill too many and her heart stops beating on a cold bathroom floor, something impossible happens. A man with eyes that hold galaxies and abysses appears from the darkness, and with a single touch, he brings her back from death. He tells her the medications weren't healing her. They were poisoning her, silencing a gift her bloodline has carried for 20 generations. He tells her he's been watching her for 3 years, forbidden by ancient law from intervening, suffering in silence as she slowly killed herself trying to be normal. His name is Adriel. He's a Nephilim, born of angel and demon, cursed to exist in eternal war with himself. 200 years ago, her ancestor made a contract with him, a desperate bargain that bound him to protect her family in exchange for one impossible hope: that the last daughter of the bloodline would see him, truly see him, and choose to love a creature, heaven once dead and hell once enslaved. He's waited centuries for her, and now that she's finally awake, now that she can see the truth of what she is and what he is, powerful forces are descending on her quiet life with one message. Choosing him means choosing war against cosmic law itself. But here's what terrifies him most. It's not the angels hunting him or the demons that want to possess her, or even the execution that awaits if she says yes. It's that, after 200 years of hoping, after watching generation after generation of women love him but never quite enough to make that final choice, he's standing in front of her broken and desperate, and doing something he swore he'd never do. He's begging her to let him protect her, begging her to see past the monster everyone says he is, begging for a chance at the one thing his cursed existence was never supposed to have. And the choice she makes in the next 24 hours won't just decide their fate. The pill bottle slipped from Inez's fingers and clattered across the bathroom tile, scattering white tablets like fallen teeth. She watched them roll, her vision doubling, tripling, the fluorescent light above fracturing into 1,000 burning stars. Her knees hit the floor, cold porcelain against her cheek. Somewhere distant, her phone buzzed with the alarm she'd set to remind herself she'd already taken her evening medication 15 minutes ago. She'd taken them twice. The realization arrived slowly, crawling through the fog in her mind like something with too many legs. Her pulse hammered in her ears, each beat stretching longer than the last. The bathroom walls breathed inward, pressed closer. She tried to reach for her phone, but her arm weighed 1,000 pounds, fingers curling uselessly against the tile. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. This is how I die. Alone on a bathroom floor, killed by the very thing that's supposed to keep me sane. The irony would have made her laugh if her throat hadn't been closing. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Not like a window opening or air conditioning kicking on. The warmth simply vanished from the room, as if something had swallowed it whole. Frost crept across the mirror in patterns too deliberate to be natural, forming symbols she'd seen before in the margins of her grandmother's books, the ones she'd burned 3 years ago, because looking at them made her head split open. "No," she whispered, the word slurring. "Not real. You're not real." But the shadow in the doorway didn't care about her denial. He stepped into the bathroom, and the light bulbs exploded in sequence, showering glass that hung suspended in the air like frozen rain. In the darkness, his eyes were the only source of illumination, one iris burning silver blue like a winter star, the other black as the space between galaxies. The mismatch should have been impossible, should have been a hallucination. But the glass cutting into her palm felt too sharp, too visceral to be anything but brutally real. "You're dying," he said, and his voice carried the weight of centuries, rough with disuse and something that might have been grief. "The medication you take, it's poison, slow poison. Tonight you've taken enough to stop your heart in approximately 7 minutes." Inez tried to speak, managed only a choked sound. Her vision tunneled, darkness creeping. In from the edges. The man, the hallucination, the impossible thing crouched beside her. And up close she could see the wrongness of him. Too beautiful, too sharp. Cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, dark hair that moved without wind. And those eyes. God. Those eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone into the twisted, frightened thing she'd become. I've watched you do this to yourself for 3 years, he continued. And now she could hear it. The barely contained. Anguish beneath the measured tone. Every pill you swallow, you're choosing death. Choosing to silence the gift your bloodline has carried for 20 generations. Do you know how many times I've stood in this doorway, watching you try to erase yourself, unable to intervene because the law I'm bound by demands your choice be free? His hand hovered over her chest, not quite touching, and she felt heat radiating from his palm, felt something inside her responding, pulling toward that warmth like a flower turning toward the sun. I'm breaking every rule I've ever followed by being here now, he said, and for the first time she heard the crack in his voice, the fracture in his impossible composure. But I cannot. I will not watch you die when you don't even understand what you're killing. Not real, she managed to gasp out, even as her body betrayed her, leaning into that phantom heat. Something that might have been pain flickered across his inhuman features. You've been telling yourself that lie since you were 8 years old. Since the night you saw your grandmother speaking to the air. Since you watched her seal a doorway with salt and iron. Since you heard the things on the other side screaming to get in. How did he know that? The memory she'd buried so deep, the one that started the doctor's visits, the medications, the diagnoses. The pills don't make the vision stop, he said. And his hand finally made contact with her chest, right above her stuttering heart. The touch burned and froze simultaneously, sent lightning through her nervous system. They just make you numb enough not to care. But your gift doesn't disappear. It turns inward, eats at you from the inside. Every supernatural entity you ignore, every spirit you refuse to see, it leaves a mark on your soul. You're not sick, Inez. You're starving. Her heart lurched, skipped 2 beats, then 3. Distantly, she realized she was going into cardiac arrest. This was it. The end of 3. Years of careful numbness, of controlled madness, of choosing safety over truth. Let me save you, he whispered. And now his other hand cupped her face, that impossible warmth seeping into her frozen skin. Let me show you what you really are, what you were always meant to be. Who? The word barely made it past her lips. My name is Adriel. His eyes, those mismatched, heartbreaking eyes, held hers with an intensity that felt like drowning and breathing all at once. And 200 years ago, your great-great-great-grandmother made a contract with me. Protection for her bloodline, a sanctuary for my cursed existence. And when the last daughter of her line came of age, he stopped, something vulnerable and ancient crossing his features. She was supposed to choose, freely, without coercion, to see me, truly see me, and decide if she could love a creature like me enough to break the chains I've worn since the moment of my creation. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she felt tears she didn't remember crying. But I won't let you die before you even know you have a choice, he said, and the anguish in his voice finally broke through, raw and devastating. Even if you hate me for this, even if you spend the rest of your life thinking I'm the greatest delusion your sick mind ever created, I've waited 2 centuries. I can wait 200 more, but not in a world where you don't exist. The darkness closed in completely. Her heart gave one final, weak flutter. And then, light exploded behind her eyes, not harsh but warm, like sunrise after an endless night, and power poured into her chest, into her blood, into the hollow spaces where she'd carved out pieces of herself to fit into a world that called her crazy. She felt her heart restart, felt the poison in her system burning away like mist under noon sun, felt every nerve ending come alive with sensation so intense it bordered on pain. When she could breathe again, when her vision cleared, Adriel was still. There. Still real. Still watching her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that carried a longing so profound it made her chest ache with sympathetic pain. And behind him, in the shattered mirror, she saw them. Hundreds of shapes. Translucent, shimmering, pressing against the veil between worlds like children, pressing faces against glass. Some beautiful, some terrible. All of them staring at her with recognition, with hunger, with relief. They'd always been there. She'd always been able to see them. "Oh God," she breathed. And it wasn't horror in her voice, but grief. Grief for the 8-year-old girl who'd been told her gift was sickness. Grief for the 26 years she'd spent trying to blind herself. Grief for every pill she'd swallowed, every vision she'd denied, every part of herself she'd killed to feel normal. "I'm so sorry," Adriel said quietly, and she believed him. "I'm so sorry no one told you the truth." Inez sat on the edge of her bathtub for 23 minutes, watching Adriel stand motionless in the doorway like a statue carved from living shadow and starlight. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with unasked questions and the weight of revelations that had shattered her understanding of reality. The spirits in the mirror had faded when her heart restarted, retreating back beyond the veil, but she could still feel them. A constant pressure at the edges of her awareness, like dozens of hands pressed against a door she'd spent years learning to keep locked. Now the lock was broken, and she didn't know if she wanted to keep them out or finally let them in. "You're still here," she said at last, her voice hoarse from screaming, or crying, or dying. She couldn't remember which had come first. "Did you expect me to disappear?" Adriel's head tilted slightly, a gesture too precise to be entirely human. "To prove I was hallucination after all?" "Yes." The admission felt like surrender. "I've spent 3 years training myself to stop believing in impossible things. And yet I remain." He shifted, and the movement was wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. Too fluid, too controlled, as if every gesture required conscious thought, as if stillness was his natural state and motion, something he'd learned to imitate. Persistently, stubbornly corporeal. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now, no longer trembling, no longer blue-tinged at the fingertips. The pills scattered across the tile seemed to mock her. Tiny white lies she'd been swallowing for years. Her phone screen showed 3 missed calls from Dr. Chen, her psychiatrist, whose last words to her had been to increase the dosage if the episodes worsened. The episodes. That's what they'd always called them. Clean, clinical language for the moments when she saw too much, felt too much, knew things she shouldn't be able to know. "I need proof," she said, meeting those impossible, mismatched eyes. "If you're real, if this is real, I need more than just you standing there being impossible." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite hurt, but close. What would constitute proof? Tell me something you couldn't know. Something I've never spoken about, never written down, never searched online. Her hands clenched into fists. Something only I would know. Adriel was silent for a long moment, and she watched the war play out across his features. The silver eye seemed to brighten while the black one deepened, as if 2 different consciousnesses fought for dominance behind that perfect face. "You're afraid of mirrors," he said finally, and his voice had gone soft, almost gentle. "Not because of what you see in them, but because of what you saw when you were 8, the night your grandmother died. Inez's breath caught. You found her in her bedroom, sitting in front of her vanity mirror. She was brushing her hair with the silver brush your grandfather gave her on their wedding day. She was humming. You thought she was fine. He took one step into the bathroom, then another, each movement deliberate and careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. But then you saw her reflection, and in the mirror she wasn't alone. Stop. The word came out broken. He didn't stop. There were 3 figures behind her, beautiful and terrible. Wings like oil slicks, eyes that burned with colors that don't exist in the spectrum humans can perceive. They were arguing over her, their voices like crystal shattering, like music played backward. And your grandmother, she just kept brushing her hair, kept humming that old Portuguese lullaby, because she'd already made her choice. Tears burned hot tracks down Inez's cheeks. How do you know this? Because I was the 4th figure in that mirror. Adriel crouched before her, bringing himself to eye level, and the grief in his expression was so raw, it felt obscene to witness. The one she was humming to. The one she'd been humming to for 67 years. She was saying goodbye. The memory crashed over her with the force of a tidal wave. She'd run from that room, screaming for her mother, and by the time they'd returned, her grandmother was dead, the silver brush still clutched in her hand, a smile on her lips. Natural causes, the doctor had said. A good death. Peaceful. The figures you saw were celestials, Adriel continued, his voice rough with emotion. Angels, though that word carries connotations that aren't quite accurate. They wanted to claim her soul, to drag her to some sanitized heaven where her gifts would be stripped away, where she'd be purified into something simple and obedient. But she'd promised herself to me decades ago, promised that when her time came, her soul would go where she chose, not where law dictated. And she chose you. It wasn't a question. She chose freedom. His hands hovered near hers, not quite touching, respecting boundaries even now. She chose to die on her own terms. Humming to a creature she'd loved in secret for most of her life, knowing her granddaughter could see everything, knowing you'd carry that memory like a wound. Inez looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, beyond the impossible beauty, beyond the mismatched eyes and the aura of wrongness. She saw the way his jaw tensed when he mentioned her grandmother, saw the barely contained longing in the set of his shoulders, saw 2 centuries of isolation etched into features that should have been ageless. You loved her, she whispered. I love all of them. The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep and private. Every woman in your bloodline who's allowed me to exist in her orbit. Your grandmother, her mother, her mother's mother. I've watched them live and love and die for 200 years, bound by a contract I can't break, waiting for the one who might choose to break it for me. What happens if I don't choose you? The question felt cruel, but she needed to know. Adriel's smile was sad and ancient. Then I continue as I am, cursed to exist between worlds, neither angel nor demon, belonging nowhere, unable to tip toward light or darkness, trapped in this eternal balance until the universe itself ends. He finally took her hand, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. But you'll still have the choice. I can teach you to use your gifts without them consuming you. I can show you how to navigate the world you've been denying. I can protect you from the things that will come hunting now that you've awakened. What things? His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. The medication you were taking, it did more than dull your senses. It masked your presence from the entities that feed on sensitives like you. Now that you've stopped, now that you've opened yourself to your true nature. He trailed off, and for the first time she heard fear in his voice. They'll sense you like blood and water, and they'll come, as if summoned by his own words. The bathroom lights flickered. Once. Twice. The temperature plummeted again, but this time the cold felt different. Malicious. Hungry. In the mirror behind Adriel, something moved in the darkness of the hallway. Something that definitely hadn't been there before. something with too many angles and a mouth that split its face in ways that violated geometry. Adriel moved faster than thought, positioning himself between Inez and the doorway, and she saw his form shift, shadows peeling away. From his body, like wings, like weapons, like promises of violence. The silver eye blazed bright enough to hurt, while the black one seemed to devour light itself. "Get behind me," he said, and his voice had changed, layered now with harmonics that resonated in her bones. "And whatever you do, don't look directly at it. Don't speak to it. Don't acknowledge its existence." But Inez had spent 26 years not looking, not speaking, not acknowledging, and she was so tired of closing her eyes to the truth. She looked. The thing in the hallway smiled at her with 3 rows of teeth, and she felt its attention lock onto her like a targeting laser, like hunger given form and purpose. "Oh," it whispered in a voice like insects crawling over dead leaves. "There you are. We've been waiting so very long for you to wake up." The thing moved like oil spreading across water, flowing through the doorway with a sound that reminded Inez of bones snapping in reverse. She couldn't look away. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to close her eyes, to reach for the pill bottle and swallow handfuls until the world made sense again. But her body had gone rigid with a terror so primal it bypassed thought entirely. Adriel's shadows exploded outward, slamming the bathroom door with enough force to crack the frame. The wood shuddered, bulged inward as something pressed against it from the other side, testing the barrier. A low laugh echoed through the walls, not from any specific direction, but from everywhere at once, as if the house itself had learned to mock her. "That won't hold it," Inez managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Adriel's hands were shaking. She saw it now, the fine tremor running through his fingers as he pressed them flat against the door, silver light bleeding from his palms and seeping into the wood like luminescent veins. "But it'll buy us 17 seconds, maybe 18. 18 seconds to do what? To get you somewhere safer than a bathroom with 1 exit and mirrors on 3 walls." He glanced back at her, and the fear in his eyes was worse than the thing in the hallway. Worse than anything she'd seen tonight, because creatures that had existed for centuries shouldn't be capable of looking that afraid. "Do you trust me?" She wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she didn't trust anything anymore. Not her eyes, not her mind, not the reality that had revealed itself to be as thin and breakable as tissue paper. But the door was bowing inward now, and through the widening crack, she could see something that might have been fingers, if fingers had too many joints and ended in hooks instead of nails. "I don't have a choice," she said. "There's always a choice." His voice carried an edge of desperation. "Even now, even here, I could leave. Seal the door behind me and let it take you quickly. That would be kinder than what comes next if you follow me." The thing in the hallway laughed again, and this time Inez felt the sound crawl inside her skull, felt it probing at the soft places behind her eyes, where thoughts became memories, became dreams. "How kind would it be?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Adriel's jaw clenched. "You'd be dead in 4 minutes. No pain after the first 30 seconds. Your soul would be consumed, yes, but you wouldn't be aware of it. You'd simply stop. And if I follow you, then you live." The door cracked down the middle. Wood splintered. But living means accepting that everything you believed about the world was a comfortable lie. It means learning to see things that will give you nightmares for the rest of your considerably shortened life. It means becoming a target for every entity that feeds on human consciousness. It means war. The thing shoved harder. The door buckled. "It also means," Adriel continued, and now his voice had gone soft, almost tender, "that you'll never be alone again. That someone will teach you to weaponize the gifts you've been taught to fear. That your grandmother's sacrifice won't have been for nothing. Inez looked at the pill bottles scattered across the floor, at the comfortable prison she'd built for herself out of medication and denial, and the desperate need to be normal. She thought about Dr. Chen's office with its soft lighting and softer lies, about the support groups where people shared their hallucinations like shameful secrets, about every single person who'd looked at her with pity and told her it would get better if she just kept taking the pills, kept ignoring the truth, kept choosing blindness over sight. She thought about her grandmother, brushing her hair in front of a mirror, humming to a creature made of shadow and starlight, choosing love over law, even as death came calling. "Teach me," Inez said. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and darkness. The thing poured through like smoke, like screams given physical form, and Inez saw it fully now in this flickering bathroom light. It wasn't one creature, but dozens. A writhing mass of partial bodies and incomplete faces, all of them reaching for her with hands that phased through solid matter, grasping at something deeper than flesh. Adriel moved between them in the space between heartbeats. His form shifted, became something vast and terrible and beautiful. Wings of pure shadow unfurling from his back, while light bled from cracks in his skin like molten silver. He grabbed Inez around the waist, and the world lurched sideways. They fell through the bathroom floor. Not down, exactly. Sideways through reality itself, through spaces that existed in the gaps between places, and Inez saw impossible things in that half-second of transit. She saw the true shape of her house, a structure of light and intention that had nothing to do with wood and drywall. She saw the ley lines her grandmother had carved into the foundation, protection sigils that pulsed with fading power. She saw her own body. From outside herself, saw the way her soul burned brighter than it should. Saw why the things in the darkness had been so hungry for her. Then they were standing in her grandmother's bedroom, the one she hadn't entered in 3 years, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and old books and secrets. Adriel released her and staggered, and she watched in horror as the light bleeding from his skin began to curdle, to darken, black veins spreading through the silver like infection. Pressed one hand against the wall to steady himself, breathing hard, and when he looked at her, his eyes had changed. The silver one had dimmed while the black one had grown, pupil expanding until it nearly swallowed the entire iris. "That was stupid," he said, and his voice carried an edge now, something cold and sharp beneath the familiar cadence. "Using that much power, they'll have felt it. Every celestial within 40 miles will know exactly where I am. The thing in the hallway is still there." He straightened with visible effort. "Circling, waiting, but it can't enter this room. Your grandmother's protections are strongest here. We have maybe an hour before they fade completely." Inez looked around the bedroom that had haunted her nightmares for years. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The vanity with its silver brush, the bookshelf crammed with volumes in Portuguese and Latin and languages that looked like they'd been written by something without human hands. The bed, with its hand-stitched quilt. And there, on the nightstand, a leather journal she'd never seen before. She moved toward it without thinking, drawn by instinct or fate, or the simple human need to understand. The leather was soft under her fingers, worn smooth by decades of handling. When she opened it, her grandmother's handwriting spilled across the pages in Portuguese, dates going back 67 years. She kept a record, Adriel said quietly from behind her, of everything, every bargain, every sacrifice, every moment of joy and terror that came with loving something she wasn't supposed to love. Inez flipped through the pages, and her grandmother's life unfolded before her. The first entry was dated 1958, written in the shaky hand of a young woman barely 20 years old. It described a night much like this one, a creature appearing in her bedroom, a choice offered without coercion. But as she read further, she found drawings, sketches of Adriel through the decades, his face unchanging while her grandmother aged in the mirror beside him. Some entries were tender, describing stolen moments and whispered conversations. Others were clinical, documenting the rules of their contract with lawyer-like precision. And some were desperate, written in the middle of the night when fear overcame love, questioning whether she'd made a mistake, whether she'd damned herself and her bloodline for something as fragile as affection. The last entry was dated 3 years ago, the night her grandmother died. "He thinks I don't know what I'm giving up," it read in Portuguese. "He thinks I'm choosing him out of love alone, but I'm choosing him because Inez will need him, because my granddaughter burns brighter than I ever did, and the things that hunt brightness in the dark are hungrier than they were in my time. He'll protect her. He'll teach her. And maybe, if she's braver than I was, she'll free him." Inez's hands trembled as she traced the words. She knew I'd be able to see. "She tried to prepare you." Adriel's voice was rough with emotion, the cold edge fading back into something more human. "But your mother wouldn't listen. She chose to believe the doctors instead of her own mother's journals. She destroyed everything she could find that referenced the supernatural. She erased your grandmother's legacy and replaced it with diagnoses." "The journals," Inez breathed. "I burned journals. 3 years ago, after the funeral. My mother told me they were just the confused writings of a woman going senile. There were 12 volumes. Each word sounded like it cost him. 12 generations of women documenting their gifts, their struggles, their triumphs. Instruction manuals for the daughters who would come after. You burned 11 of them." The weight of that loss hit her like a physical blow. Knowledge accumulated over centuries turned to ash because she'd been too afraid to read them, too desperate to believe. Her mother's comfortable lies. "But you saved one," she said, looking down at the journal in her hands. "I saved the only one that mattered." Adriel moved closer, and she could see the effort it took him to maintain his human form, could see the way shadows and light warred beneath his skin. "The one that explains why I'm here, what I am, what you could become if you choose it." Before she could respond, the bedroom lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Adriel's entire body went rigid. "No." "What?" "The protections. They're failing faster than they should." He moved to the window, peered out into the darkness beyond. "Something's accelerating the decay. Something powerful." Inez joined him at the window and immediately wished she hadn't. Her front yard, usually empty except for the oak tree her grandfather had planted, was now filled with figures. Dozens of them. Some beautiful beyond description, with wings that caught moonlight and refracted it into colors. That hurt to perceive. Others were walking wounds, shapes that suggested human form, but violated it in fundamental ways. And in the center of them all, standing beneath the oak tree with his hands clasped behind his back like a patient teacher waiting for class to begin, was a man in an immaculate suit. He was looking directly at the bedroom window, directly at her. When he smiled, Inez felt it in her bones. "Adriel," the man said, and his voice carried clearly through glass and distance and reality itself. "It's been 67 years. I think it's time we renegotiated the terms of your little contract." The man in the suit didn't move, but somehow he was closer. Not physically, Inez realized with creeping horror. He was closer in her mind, his presence expanding to fill every corner of her consciousness like water flooding a basement. She could feel him rifling through her memories, her fears, her desires, cataloging each one with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining. Organs. "Stop looking at him." Adriel's hand clamped over her eyes, breaking the connection. The sudden absence of that invasive presence left her gasping. "Don't meet his gaze. Don't speak to him. Don't even think his name too loudly." "Who is he?" The words came out strangled. "Samael." Adriel's voice carried a weight that made the name feel like a curse. The venom of God. The original tempter. The one who convinced the first woman that disobedience could taste like freedom. His hand was still pressed to her face, and she felt it trembling. He's been hunting me for 2 centuries, and I just rang every alarm bell in creation by using that much power to save you. Through the gaps between Adriel's fingers, Inez could see the bedroom reflected in the vanity mirror. In the reflection, Samael was no longer standing beneath the oak tree. He was standing at the foot of her grandmother's bed, examining the room with the interest of a prospective buyer touring a house. His reflection smiled at her reflection, and she felt that invasion begin again, gentler this time, almost seductive in its approach. "Mirrors," she whispered. "He's in the mirrors." Adriel spun, keeping himself between her and the vanity, but it was too late. Samael's reflection spread like a virus, appearing in every reflective surface in the room. The window glass, the picture frames, the polished surface of the silver brush. A dozen versions of him, all smiling with patience that spoke of eons. Adriel. Each reflection set in perfect synchronization, the effect disorienting and nauseating. "You've broken so many rules tonight, using celestial power in the mortal realm without sanction, interfering with a human's free will by healing her without explicit consent, and most damning of all, allowing your cursed existence to be witnessed by one not bound to secrecy." The reflections tilted their heads in unison. "The Court of Radiance has authorized your immediate termination. I've been given the honor of executing the sentence." She consented. Adriel's voice was steady, but Inez could see the black veins spreading further through his skin, could see the way his human form was beginning to fray at the edges. "The contract allows me to intervene in matters of life and death if the current heir is in danger. The contract your kind forged with a human woman 200 years ago." Samael's laugh echoed from every mirror, multiplying until it became a chorus of mockery. A contract. Written in defiance of divine law, signed in blood by an abomination who should have been unmade the moment of his conception. That contract has no legal standing in any celestial court. It has standing in the only court that matters. Adriel's hand found Inez's, squeezed once. "The court of human free will. The one law even you can't break without consequences." The temperature in the room dropped so rapidly that Inez's breath crystallized in the air. Every reflection of Samael stopped smiling. Simultaneously, and the absence of that false warmth was somehow more terrifying than its presence. "Free will," Samael said softly, and now his voice carried an edge that could have carved through steel. "You dare invoke that sacred principle while standing in a room saturated with your influence? While holding the hand of a woman whose grandmother you seduced into damnation? While tainting a bloodline for your own selfish purposes?" The reflections leaned forward. "Let me make this simple. Adriel, release her. Walk away. Face your execution with whatever dignity your mixed blood allows. Do this, and I'll ensure the girl lives. I'll even let her keep her pathetic little gift. She can spend the rest of her natural life seeing things she can't touch, knowing things she can't change, slowly going mad like every sensitive before her." "And if I refuse?" Adriel asked, though the answer was written in the way every reflective surface in the room had begun to frost over, ice spreading in, patterns that looked suspiciously like wings. "Then I'll be forced to conclude that she's complicit in your crimes, that she's chosen, of her own free will, to harbor a fugitive from divine justice." Samael's smile returned, colder than the ice creeping across the mirrors. "And free will, dear Adriel, cuts both ways. If she chooses you, she chooses the consequences. All of them." Inez felt Adriel's hand start to pull away from hers, felt him preparing to sacrifice himself, to walk into whatever execution awaited him, to preserve her illusion of choice. And something inside her, something that had been sleeping beneath layers of medication and denial and fear, finally woke up screaming. "No." The word came out harder than she intended. She tightened her grip on Adriel's hand, refusing to let him go. "No, you don't get to decide this for me. Neither of you do." Every reflection of Samael focused on her, with with an intensity that felt like being pinned beneath a microscope. "Child, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand that my grandmother loved him for 67 years. Inez cut him off, and she was shocked by the steadiness in her own voice. "I understand that she documented everything, every sacrifice, every moment of joy, every instance of protection he provided. I've read her words. I've seen the proof of what he is, what she chose, what she wanted for me." "Inez, don't—" Adriel started, but she silenced him with a look. "I understand," she continued, speaking directly to Samael's reflection in the vanity mirror, "that you're offering me a life where I keep my gift, but lose any ability to use it meaningfully, where I see everything, but can touch nothing, where I spend decades slowly fracturing under the weight of knowledge I can't share." She took a breath. "That's not mercy. That's a different kind of execution. So you choose him?" Samael's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. "You choose to harbor a fugitive? To make yourself an enemy of the Celestial Order? To mark yourself as fair game for every demon and fallen angel who's been hunting him for 2 centuries? He paused. "You choose to die alongside him when I'm forced to execute you both?" The weight of those words settled over the room like a physical thing. Adriel's hand in hers had gone rigid, and she could feel him preparing to push her away, to shove her toward some imagined safety, even if it cost him everything. But Inez was done being protected from the truth. Done being saved from herself. "I choose," she said carefully, "to hear his side of the story before I let you kill him. I choose to understand what crime he committed that was so terrible it warrants 2 centuries of hunting. I choose to know exactly what contract my grandmother made and why." She met Samael's gaze in the mirror, felt that invasive presence trying to worm its way back into her mind, and pushed back with everything she had. "And I choose to make that decision with full knowledge of the consequences, not because some angel in a suit threatened me into compliance." For 5 heartbeats, nothing happened. The frost on the mirrors stopped spreading. The creatures in the yard fell silent. Even the thing still circling somewhere in her house seemed to pause in its endless prowling. Then Samael laughed, and it was genuine this time, surprised and almost delighted. "Oh, I see why he's so taken with you," he said, and all the reflections dissolved except the one in the vanity mirror. "You have her fire. Your grandmother's absolute refusal to be intimidated by beings who've existed since the first stars ignited." He adjusted his tie, a strangely human gesture. "Very well, I'll grant you a reprieve. 24 hours to hear his story, to read the contract, to understand exactly what you're choosing. And then?" Inez asked. "And then I return." The reflection began to fade, edges bleeding into the silver surface like watercolor in rain, with the full weight of the court of radiance behind me. "And you tell me, with full knowledge and free will, whether you choose to stand with an abomination against the natural order of creation." His voice was almost gone now, barely a whisper. "Choose wisely, Inez of the burning blood. Some choices can't be unmade. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." The reflection vanished. The frost melted. The pressure in the air released so suddenly that Inez's ears popped. In the yard, the creatures began to disperse, dissolving into shadows and starlight and the spaces between moments. Within 3 minutes, the only evidence they'd been there at all was the way the grass had withered in perfect circles where they'd stood, as if their mere presence had leached the life from the earth. Adriel turned to face her, and she saw he was crying. Silver tears from one eye, black from the other, running down his face in luminescent tracks. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, voice breaking. "You should have let me go. Probably." Inez picked up her grandmother's journal from where she'd dropped it during Samael's arrival. "But I'm done letting other people make my choices for me. Done letting fear decide my future. She held the journal against her chest like armor. "So you have 24 hours to convince me that my grandmother wasn't insane, that you're worth defying heaven for, that this gift isn't a curse." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the being who'd watched her. Family for 2 centuries, who'd saved her life tonight, who'd been willing to die to preserve her choice. "Start talking," she said. "And don't leave anything out." Adriel didn't speak for 7 full minutes. He stood in the center of her grandmother's bedroom, shadows pooling at his feet like living things, while those mismatched eyes stared at something Inez couldn't see. When he finally moved, it was to sink down onto the edge of the bed, his too perfect form suddenly looking unbearably tired. "I was born during a war," he said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "Not a human war. The kind of conflict that reshapes reality itself, that leaves scars in the fabric of existence that never fully heal." He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "My father was Sariel, angel of the moon, commander of celestial legions. My mother was Lilith's daughter, a demon who'd climbed her way up from the lowest circles of hell through centuries of calculated cruelty." Inez lowered herself into the chair by the vanity, still clutching her grandmother's journal. "They fell in love. They fell into bed during a ceasefire negotiation." His laugh was bitter. "Love had nothing to do with it. It was strategy, blackmail, the kind of leverage you gather when you're playing games that span millennia. My mother thought a child would give her immunity from celestial attacks. My father thought he could raise me to be the perfect weapon against hell. He..." paused. They were both wrong. The shadows at his feet began to writhe, forming shapes that suggested wings, claws, halos made of thorns. Inez watched them, transfixed, as they played out a story older than civilizations. "I was born with my father's light and my mother's darkness fighting for dominance in every cell," Adriel continued. "Not blended, not balanced, actively at war. Every moment of my existence is both sides trying to destroy the other, while somehow keeping me alive in the crossfire." He met her eyes, and she saw the exhaustion there, the kind of weariness that came from centuries of internal conflict. "Do you know what it's like to want to heal and destroy simultaneously? To feel compassion and hunger for suffering in the same breath? To be so fundamentally broken that your very existence violates the laws of creation?" "No," Inez said honestly, "but I know what it's like to be told you're broken when you're just different." Something flickered in his expression. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. "When I was 50 years old, still young by immortal standards, the Court of Radiance issued their ruling," he said. "Nephilim like me, born of angel and demon, were abominations. We were proof that the clear lines between good and evil could blur. We were walking heresies that questioned the very foundations of cosmic law." His hands clenched into fists. "They ordered our extermination, every single one of us. Hundreds of beings who'd done nothing except be born." Inez felt her throat tighten. "Your father led the first purge personally." The words came out flat, emotionless, but she saw the way his jaw tensed. "He found me in a sanctuary where I'd been hiding with 23 others, mostly children, some even younger than I was." He stopped, and when he continued, his voice had gone hollow. "He gave me a choice. Join him in executing the others, prove my celestial blood was stronger than my demonic corruption, earn a place in heaven's armies, or die with them." The silence that followed was suffocating. Inez wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but something told her that touching him right now would shatter whatever fragile control he was maintaining over the war raging inside him. "I refused," Adriel said finally. "I told him I'd rather die than become what he was. A creature who could murder children in the name of purity." His eyes had gone distant, lost in memory. "So he stabbed me. Divine blade straight through the heart. It should have been instant. Should have been merciful. But Nephilim don't die easily. We're too stubborn, too caught between worlds to go quietly into any afterlife. He pulled aside the collar of his shirt, and Inez saw it. A scar that looked like it had been burned into his chest, radiating out from where his heart should be in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The tissue was wrong, half healed and half rotting, as if his body couldn't decide whether to regenerate or decay. I was dying for 3 days, he said, letting the fabric fall back into place. Lying in my own blood while the sanctuary burned around me, while the others screamed, while my father's soldiers did their holy work. His voice cracked. And then she found me. My grandmother. Inez breathed. Her grandmother. Adriel's smile was sad and ancient. Maria, your great-great-great-grandmother. She was 19 years old, newly married, fleeing from a husband who beat her when she didn't conceive fast enough. She'd taken shelter in the sanctuary, not knowing what it was, just seeking somewhere safe from human monsters. He paused. Instead, she found me, this dying thing that was neither angel nor demon, this creature that shouldn't exist, bleeding light and shadow onto consecrated ground. Inez opened her grandmother's journal with trembling hands, flipping back to the very first entry. But the handwriting was different here, older, the Portuguese more archaic. And at the top of the page, a name. Maria Santos, 1824. She should have run, Adriel continued. Should have let me die and returned to her miserable marriage and normal human life. But she was a sensitive, like you, like all the women in your line. She could see what I was, and more importantly, she could see what I wasn't. His voice softened. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't evil. I was just broken and terrified and so very tired of fighting. She saved you, Inez said, scanning the cramped handwriting that detailed finding a creature with wings of shadow and light, with eyes that held galaxies and abysses, with a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding celestial fire. She made a contract, Adriel corrected. A binding agreement written in blood and witnessed by powers older than the Court of Radiance. She would hide me, shelter me, give me purpose and connection to the mortal world. In return, I would protect her bloodline. Every daughter born to her line would have a guardian who could navigate both celestial and infernal politics, who could shield them from the things that hunt sensitives. He stood, began to pace, but the contract had one final clause, one escape hatch for both of us. The choice, Inez whispered, remembering Samael's words. If the last daughter of Maria's line, when she came of age and with full knowledge of what I am, chose freely to accept me not as guardian, but as equal partner, as companion, as... He stopped, struggling with the word. As beloved. Then I would be released from my curse. I could finally choose which side of my nature to embrace, could tip the balance one way or the other, and end the eternal war inside me. And if she refused, then I continue as I am until the bloodline ends, or the universe does, whichever comes first. He turned to face her fully. Your grandmother was supposed to be that last daughter. Maria's line had grown thin, generations of single children or daughters who died young. Your grandmother was the first in a century to survive to adulthood with the gift intact. Inez's hands had gone numb around the journal. She loved you. She did. The words sounded like confession and apology and grief all at once. For 67 years, she loved me with everything she had. We were partners in every sense except the one that mattered. I couldn't ask her to make that final choice, couldn't bind her to a creature like me when she still had a chance at normal life. And she, his voice broke. She was too kind to force the choice on me. She knew that if she said yes, I'd have to pick a side, become fully angel or fully demon, lose half of myself forever. So she died without choosing, Inez said, understanding dawning like cold water. She died without releasing you from the contract. She died, Adriel said softly, hoping that her granddaughter would be braver than she was. that you would either set me free or release me from this existence entirely. Either option would be mercy. Inez stood, her legs unsteady, and crossed to where he stood. Up close, she could see the way his form flickered, could see glimpses of what lay beneath the human mask. Wings that existed in too many dimensions. Eyes that multiplied when she wasn't looking directly at them. A being so fundamentally impossible that reality itself seemed to reject him. "If I choose you," she said carefully, "and you pick the angelic side, what happens?" "I lose the darkness," he said. "Lose the parts of me that understand rage and hunger and the beautiful cruelty of survival. I become a creature of pure law and light. Probably better. Certainly more acceptable to the cosmic order." He paused. "But I'd also lose the parts that let me empathize with human suffering, that let me understand why someone might break rules to protect what they love. I'd become more like my father." "And if you pick the demonic side?" His expression darkened. "I'd lose the light, lose compassion, mercy, the ability to choose restraint over indulgence. I'd become everything the Court of Radiance feared I'd be, powerful and terrible and ultimately empty." His hand lifted, almost touched her face, then fell. "I'd probably kill you within a year. Not because I wanted to, but because I wouldn't be capable of wanting anything except consumption. So both options destroy who you are," Inez said. "Yes." The admission was barely audible. "That's why the contract was always cruel. It offers freedom through amputation, survival through self-destruction." Inez looked down at the journal in her hands, at generations of women who'd loved this broken, impossible creature, who'd chosen to see him as more than the sum of his warring parts, who'd believed that something born of darkness and light didn't have to choose, didn't have to diminish itself to fit into categories created by beings who'd never known what it meant to be caught between worlds. "What if," she said slowly, "there's a third option? What if you don't have to choose at all?" Adriel stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten existed. "That's not how the contract works. The choice is binary, light or dark, angel or demon. The choice is mine, though," Inez said, and her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "The contract says the last daughter chooses. It doesn't specify what she's choosing." She met his eyes, those beautiful, impossible eyes that held entire cosmologies. "What if I choose you exactly as you are? Both sides. All the contradictions. The eternal war. What if I choose the abomination and tell heaven and hell both that they can go fuck themselves?" For 3 heartbeats, Adriel simply stood there, frozen. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed, and Inez caught him without thinking, her arms around a being who'd existed for 2 centuries, who'd been hunted and broken and told his entire life that his existence was a mistake. "That's not possible," he whispered against her shoulder. "The cosmic laws don't allow—" "I don't care about cosmic laws," Inez said fiercely. "I care about free will, mine and yours, and I freely choose to see if we can write a different ending." Outside, the sky began to lighten with false dawn. 24 hours had somehow become 20. Time was running out. They stayed like that for 11 minutes, Inez holding a being who'd forgotten what it meant to be held, Adriel trembling against her, as if her words had cracked something fundamental in his carefully constructed armor. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet with those impossible tears, silver and black mixing on his cheeks like some cosmic watercolor. "You don't understand what you're offering," he said. But there was hope in his voice now, fragile and terrified, and achingly human. To choose both sides means binding yourself to something that will never stop fighting itself, means living with someone who might heal you in one breath and hurt you in the next. Not out of malice, but because that's what I am. I spent 26 years hurting myself with pills that were supposed to heal me, Inez said, still close enough that she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. I think I understand contradiction better than you give me credit for." A sound came from downstairs. Not the slithering wrongness of the creature that had attacked earlier, but something worse. Footsteps. Slow, measured, distinctly human, except for the way each step seemed to echo with harmonics that made the house's foundation groan in protest. Adriel's head snapped toward the door, and instantly his form shifted, becoming less human and more threat. The shadows at his feet expanded, rose up like living smoke, while light bled through his skin in patterns that suggested armor made of starlight and conviction. "He's early," Adriel said, voice gone hard. "Samael said 24 hours. Maybe he's not known for his patience." Ines moved to the door, but Adriel caught her wrist, his grip careful. Despite the obvious fear in his eyes, "Whatever happens, whatever he says or shows you, remember that his entire existence is built on finding the exact words that will make you doubt yourself." His mismatched eyes bored into hers. "He will offer you safety. He will show you futures where you live long and comfortable and normal. He will make choosing me seem like choosing destruction. And what if he's right?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Pain flickered across Adriel's features, but he didn't let go. "Then you should choose safety. Choose life. Choose the version of yourself that gets to be happy." His thumb traced a circle on her wrist, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I've existed in torment for 200 years. I can exist for 200 more if it means you get to be free." The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. A knock followed, polite and civilized and utterly wrong in its normalcy. "I know you're both in there," Samael's voice came through the wood, pleasant and conversational. "I thought we might talk somewhere more comfortable than a dead woman's bedroom. The kitchen, perhaps. I'll even make coffee. I do an excellent pour-over." Inez looked at Adriel, saw the war playing out across his face, the urge to hide her warring with the knowledge that hiding was impossible. She made the decision for both of them and opened the door. Samael stood in the hallway exactly as he'd appeared in the mirrors. Immaculate suit. Patient smile. Hands clasped loosely in front of him like a priest or a funeral director. Up close, his beauty was almost painful to perceive, the kind of perfection that seemed to mock human genetics by existing at all. But there was something off about his eyes, something that suggested the darkness behind them went down much, much further than should be physically possible. "Ines," he said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "Thank you for being reasonable. Adriel has a tendency toward the dramatic, hiding, fleeing, making last stands in crumbling sanctuaries. It's exhausting, really." "You're early," she said, keeping her voice level. "Am I?" He checked a watch that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. "Time is such a slippery thing when you're immortal. Sometimes 24 hours feels like 20 minutes. Sometimes it feels like 20 centuries." He smiled. "But I suppose I am a bit eager. Shall we?" He turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs, clearly expecting them to follow. Adriel's hand found Ines's again, and she felt the tremor running through him, felt the way his form kept flickering at the edges, as if his body couldn't decide which version of itself to present. The kitchen looked exactly as Ines had left it 12 hours ago, before her world had shattered and rebuilt itself into something unrecognizable. Dirty dishes in the sink, half-empty coffee mug on the counter. Bill notices stuck to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like tiny succulents. Evidence of a normal life that already felt like it belonged to someone else. Samael moved through the space with disturbing familiarity, finding the coffee beans in the cupboard, the grinder, the kettle. He worked with the precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times, who'd perfected the ritual across centuries of practice. "Your great-great-great-grandmother had terrible taste in coffee," he said conversationally as he measured grounds. "Maria, she preferred it so sweet it was basically dessert." He glanced at Inez. "Your grandmother, though, she understood that coffee should be respected. Dark roast, No sugar, consumed while reading contracts or historical documents or love letters from creatures that shouldn't exist. You knew her, Inez said. It wasn't a question. I know all of them. Samael poured water over the grounds in a slow spiral, the motion hypnotic. Every woman in your bloodline for 200 years. I've watched them grow up, fall in, love, make terrible decisions, and eventually die. It's been quite the longitudinal study in human stubbornness. He smiled at Adriel. Your family has a type, beautiful broken things with more baggage than a 19th century steamer trunk. Get to the point, Adriel said, his voice carrying an edge that made the kitchen lights flicker. The point, Samael said, unbothered by the threat in Adriel's tone, is that Inez deserves to understand exactly what she'd be committing to before she makes any irreversible choices. He finished the pour-over, divided the coffee into 3 mugs with the ease of a practiced host. So I'm going to show her. Not tell. Show. He placed 1 mug in front of Inez, and the moment her fingers touched the ceramic, the kitchen vanished. She was standing in a cemetery under a sky the color of old bruises. Rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, and in front of her was a grave with her name on it. Inés Santos. Born, lived, died at 32. The headstone was weathered, worn by years of exposure, and carved beneath her name was a single word: beloved. This is one possible future. Samael's voice came from behind her, though when she turned he wasn't there. The one where you choose Adriel, where you bind yourself to him and damn the consequences. The scene shifted, and now she was watching herself, older, thinner, with silver streaking through her hair, despite being barely 30. This other Inez was running through abandoned buildings, blood on her clothes, terror in her eyes. Behind her came things with too many limbs, things that wore human faces like masks, things that existed in the spaces between reality's cracks. The first year isn't so bad, Samael narrated, his voice clinical. You learn to use your gifts. You fight together. You even have moments of happiness. The scene shifted again, showed her and Adriel in what might have been a moment of peace, his arms around her, her face pressed against his chest. But the hunt never stops. Every celestial and infernal entity that wants him dead knows that the easiest way to hurt an immortal is through what he loves. Now she was watching herself being dragged through a doorway made of screaming faces, watching Adriel tear himself apart trying to reach her, shadows and light exploding from his body as he fought against a dozen attackers. She saw him forced to choose, saw the moment his celestial side won, saw him transform into something cold and perfect, and utterly without mercy. He saves you, Samael said, but the cost is everything that made him capable of loving you in the first place. You spend the next 3 years with a creature that wears his face but feels nothing when he looks at you. And when you finally can't take it anymore, when you beg him to end it, he does. Quickly, cleanly, because that's what angels do for broken things. The cemetery reappeared, that headstone with its single word, beloved, a mockery of everything she'd hoped for. Or, Samael's voice softened, I can show you a different future, one where you make the smart choice. The scene shifted again, and now she was in an office, well lit and comfortable, working on translation projects. No blood, no terror, no creatures hunting her through the darkness. This version of her looked healthy, happy, maybe even content. There was a wedding ring on her finger, photos on her desk of a normal family with a normal husband, and 2 normal children who would never know their mother could see things that weren't supposed to exist. You still have your gift, Samael said. You still see the world as it truly is. But you learn to ignore it, to live alongside the supernatural without engaging with it. You have a good life, a safe life. You grow old. You die surrounded by people who love you. You leave behind a legacy that doesn't include a gravestone in a cemetery no human can find. Inez was back in her kitchen, the mug still warm in her hands. Samael watching her with an expression that might have been genuine concern. "So," he said quietly, "knowing what you know now, having seen both paths, tell me, Inés Santos, what do you choose?" Inés set the coffee mug down carefully, her hands steadier than they had any right to be after watching herself die in a dozen different timelines. She looked at Samael, at his patient expression, at the way he stood there radiating false concern, like a wolf in shepherd's clothing, offering to guard the flock. "Those futures you showed me," she said slowly, "they're real? As real as anything can be before it happens." Samael leaned against her counter with the ease of someone who'd done this speech 1,000 times. "Time isn't linear for beings like me. I can see the branches, the possibilities, the way choices ripple outward like stones dropped in still water. Then show me yours." The words came out harder than she intended. Samael's pleasant expression flickered. "I'm sorry? Show me your futures. The ones where I choose safety, where I have that normal family and comfortable life." Inés stepped closer to him, close enough that she could see her reflection in his two perfect eyes. "Show me what happens to Adriel in those timelines." Something dangerous moved beneath Samael's civilized mask. "That's not relevant to your decision, isn't it?" She glanced at Adriel, who'd gone very still, shadows pooling at his feet like spilled ink. "You said I should make a choice with full knowledge. That's what my grandmother wanted, what all the women in my line wanted. So show me what happens to him if I walk away." The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. 10. 15. Then Samael smiled, and it was the first genuine expression she'd seen on his face, cold and sharp and utterly without mercy. "Very well," he said, "since you insist." He touched her forehead, and the kitchen dissolved into something worse than any cemetery. She was standing in a room made of light so bright, it burned to perceive. In the center, chained with bonds that looked like concentrated starlight, was Adriel. But this version of him was broken in ways that went beyond physical damage. His wings, those impossible shadows and radiance, had been torn away, leaving wounds that wept darkness. His eyes, both of them now, had gone empty, staring at nothing with the blank expression of something that had forgotten how to feel. "Execution takes time for Nephilim," Samael's voice narrated, clinical and detached. "We can't simply unmake you. You're too tangled in the fabric of reality, half celestial, half infernal. So we dismantle you slowly. Strip away the demonic corruption first, then burn out the celestial essence, then finally dissolve whatever remains." He paused. "It takes approximately 47 years. 47 years of constant agony, of being slowly erased from existence while remaining conscious enough to know what's happening." The scene shifted. Now she saw Adriel in the moments between torture sessions, alone in that burning room, whispering names. Her grandmother's name, her great-grandmother's name, going back through generations, reciting the bloodline like a prayer or a litany of failures, as if remembering the women who'd loved him could somehow make the pain bearable. "He doesn't scream," Samael continued. "Not once in 47 years. Do you know what that level of stubbornness looks like to the Court of Radiance? Like defiance. Like proof that he's too dangerous to allow even this much dignity." The scene shifted again, showed celestial beings discussing whether to extend his execution, to make an example that would last centuries instead of decades. "Stop," Inés whispered. But Samael wasn't finished. "This is the future where you choose safety," he said. And now she was watching herself in that comfortable office again, with that normal family, that normal life. But this time she saw the moments between the happiness. Saw this version of herself waking up screaming from dreams she couldn't remember. Saw her taking pills again. Different pills, but the same desperate need to not see, not feel, not know. Saw her at 45, sitting alone in a dark room, holding her grandmother's journal that she'd kept hidden from her family, reading the same passages over and over as if trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. "You'll live," Samael said softly. "You'll even be happy in the way humans measure happiness. But every time you see something supernatural, every time your gift reminds you of what you are, you'll remember what you chose. You'll remember that somewhere, in a room made of burning light, a creature who waited 200 years for you is being slowly unmade, and you'll have to live with that." The kitchen snapped back into focus with enough force to make Inez stumble. Adriel caught her automatically, and the moment his skin touched hers, she felt it, the bond that had been forming since the moment he'd saved her life, tightening like a physical thing around her heart. "That's not fair," she said, voice shaking. "You're asking me to choose between his suffering and mine. I'm asking you to choose reality over fantasy." Samael's patience had worn thin. "Love doesn't conquer all, Inez. It doesn't stop the hunt. It doesn't change cosmic law. It doesn't make happy endings appear out of thin air." He moved closer, and the temperature in the room dropped. "Your grandmother loved him for 67 years, and still couldn't make that final choice. She died hoping you'd be braver, but bravery without wisdom is just another word for suicide. She died," Adriel said quietly, and his voice carried a weight that made the words feel like revelation. "Because she knew something you've forgotten, Samael." The angel's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "That the contract wasn't written by Maria alone." Adriel's grip on Inez tightened. "It was witnessed by powers older than the court of radiance. Powers that remember when free will was still sacred, before your kind decided that cosmic order mattered more than choice." He turned to Inez, and in his mismatched eyes she saw desperate hope warring with terrible fear. "The contract doesn't say the last daughter must choose light or darkness. It says she must choose freely. And free will, true free will, includes the option to refuse the binary entirely." "That's semantics," Samael snapped. "That's law." Adriel's form began to shift, becoming more of what he truly was. And Inez saw it now, really saw it. Not an abomination, not a mistake, but something that existed in defiance of false categories, that refused to be diminished into either or, that embodied the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the universe was more complicated than heaven and hell wanted to admit. "If she chooses both sides of me," Adriel continued, and now his voice carried harmonics that made the house's foundations sing in response. "If she accepts the contradiction without trying to resolve it, then the contract is fulfilled not by my transformation, but by the validation of my existence, as I am." Samael's pleasant mask shattered completely. "That's not how cosmic law works. It's exactly how free will works." Inez stepped between them, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "You keep talking about law and order and the natural way of things. But everything I've seen tonight tells me your laws are just choices that powerful beings made a long time ago and decided to call inevitable." She looked at Adriel, at this creature who'd existed in torment for 2 centuries rather than become something simpler. "He's living proof that your categories are bullshit, and you want to execute him not because he's dangerous, but because he's inconvenient. He's an abomination that violates the fundamental structure of reality," Samael said, and for the first time she heard real anger in his voice. "He's a person who's been told his entire existence that he's wrong for not fitting into boxes that were never designed to hold him." Inez felt tears burning in her eyes, but her voice didn't shake. "And I'm done letting powerful beings tell vulnerable ones that they need to change or die to make the world more comfortable." She turned to Adriel, took both of his hands in hers, felt the way his form flickered and stabilized at her touch, as if her acceptance was an anchor in his perpetual storm. "I choose you," she said, and the words felt like falling and flying simultaneously. Both sides, all the contradictions, the eternal war, I choose the abomination, and I choose to believe that love isn't about fixing what's broken, but about seeing the wholeness in what everyone else calls damage. The air in the kitchen began to vibrate, a frequency so low it was more feeling than sound. Adriel's eyes went wide, shocked and terrified, and achingly grateful all at once. "Inés, you don't," he started, but she cut him off. "I know exactly what I'm doing." She squeezed his hands. "I'm choosing to write a different ending. One where you don't have to diminish yourself to survive. One where I don't have to choose between safety and truth." She looked at Samael. "And if that violates your cosmic law, then your law needs to change." The vibration intensified, and now she could see it. Threads of light and darkness weaving together between her hands and Adriel's, forming patterns that looked like the contract her grandmother had written, but transformed, evolved, expanded into something the original signatories probably never imagined possible. "No," Samael said, and now his form was changing too, becoming less human and more threat, wings of burning light unfurling from his back. "I won't allow this. The court won't allow this." "The contract was witnessed by older powers," Adriel said, and his voice had gone strange, layered with centuries of hope finally permitted to surface. "Powers that predate your court's jurisdiction. If she chooses freely, if I accept freely, then it's done. Law fulfilled through a loophole written by beings who understood that true free will means the freedom to create options that don't yet exist." Samael's wings spread until they filled the kitchen, until burning feathers scraped against the ceiling. "Then I'll kill you both before the bond completes. Better you die together than create precedent that could unravel 2,000 years of cosmic order." He moved. With the speed of starlight collapsing, divine blade appearing in his hand, aimed directly at Inés's heart. And Adriel, broken, beautiful, impossible Adriel, threw himself between them. The blade went through Adriel's chest, exactly where his father's had 2 centuries ago. Divine metal piercing the scar that had never fully healed. Light exploded from the wound, blinding and terrible, and Inés screamed as she felt it, felt the agony tearing through the bond that had been forming between them, felt him dying in her arms for the second time in 24 hours. But this time was different. This time she wasn't numb with medication. This time she knew what she was. This time she refused to let go. Her hands pressed against the wound, and power poured from her palms without conscious thought. Silver-white energy that she'd been suppressing for 26 years, suddenly unleashed with the force of a dam breaking. It wasn't angelic power, wasn't demonic, wasn't anything the cosmic order had a name for. It was purely, defiantly human. The power of a sensitive, who could see between worlds, who existed at the intersection of reality and impossibility, who'd been told her entire life that her gift was sickness, when it was actually something far more dangerous to beings who relied on strict categories. She was a bridge, and bridges connected things that weren't supposed to touch. The wound in Adriel's chest began to close, but not heal. Instead, it transformed. The light bleeding from it turned prismatic, refracting into colors that shouldn't exist, and where her hands touched his skin, new patterns emerged. Not scars, markings. The contract made visible, written directly into his flesh in script that looked like her grandmother's handwriting mixed with languages that predated human civilization. Impossible, Samael breathed, his blade still extended, still dripping with Adriel's luminescent blood. Humans can't channel that kind of power. Sensitives are observers, not participants. Not what? Inés's voice came out layered, harmonized with something vast and old that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to wake it. Not capable of deciding our own fate. Not powerful enough to challenge rules written without our consent. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw past the beautiful mask to the fear beneath. "You're terrified. Not of Adriel. Of the possibility that Humans might stop accepting that supernatural beings get to write all the rules. Adriel gasped, his back arching as the transformation spread through his body. The war between light and darkness that had raged in him for 200 years didn't stop, didn't resolve, but changed. Instead of two sides fighting for dominance, they began to move in harmony, like a dance, like breath, like the way day and night existed not in opposition, but in cycle. "What are you doing to him?" Samael demanded, wings flaring wider. "I'm not doing anything." Inez kept her hands pressed to Adriel's chest, anchoring him through the transformation. "He's doing it himself. Finally. After 2 centuries of being told he had to choose, he's choosing both. Integration without erasure. Wholeness without amputation." The markings spread further, covering Adriel's arms, his throat, his face in patterns that looked like wings and roots, and equations that described impossible geometries. His eyes, those mismatched. Eyes began to change. The silver didn't darken, and the black didn't lighten. Instead, they remained distinct, but somehow unified, like looking at a coin from both sides simultaneously, seeing heads and tails in the same moment. "The contract," Adriel managed to say, his voice raw with pain and wonder. "It's rewriting itself. It's... Oh God, Inez, I can feel them. All of them. Every woman in your bloodline who ever loved me. Every choice they made. Every moment they protected me or I protected them. It's all here. All of it matters. None of it was wasted." Samael's form flickered, uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. "This breaks cosmic law." "No," a new voice said, and Inez felt the words reverberate through dimensions she couldn't see, but could suddenly sense. "It fulfills law through a path we knew would eventually manifest, given sufficient time and sufficient love." The kitchen didn't change exactly, but presence entered it. Not one being, but many. Entities so old and vast that perceiving them directly would have shattered Inez's mind. She saw them only as impressions, as the way reality bent around their attention, as the feeling of being observed by something that remembered when the universe was young. "The witnesses," Adriel whispered, and there was reverence in his voice. "The ones who signed Maria's contract. We witnessed a choice made in defiance of newer laws," the voice continued, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "A choice that preserved free will when younger powers sought to restrict it. We agreed that if any descendant of that bloodline proved capable of loving without requiring conformity, of accepting wholeness instead of demanding simplification, we would honor that choice regardless of what the Court of Radiance decreed." Samael's wings folded slowly, and Inez saw something she never expected to see in an angel's expression. Defeat. Not angry or resentful, but tired. As if he'd been fighting a battle he always knew he'd eventually lose. "So that's it?" he said quietly. 2 centuries of enforcement, of maintaining order, of preventing chaos, and it's all undone because one human decided love was more important than survival? "No," Inez said, and she finally took her hands away from Adriel's chest, watching as he stood on his own, watching as the wound closed completely, leaving only those beautiful markings behind. "It's undone because every woman in my bloodline made that choice. My grandmother, her mother, her mother's mother. 20 generations of women who looked at something broken and chose to see it as whole. I'm just the one who finally had the courage to say it out loud." The witnesses' presence began to fade, their attention withdrawing like tide receding from shore. But before they vanished completely, Inez felt one of them brush against her consciousness, and in that moment she understood. This had always been possible. The option to refuse the binary, to create third paths, to write new endings. But it required exactly what her grandmother had hoped for. Someone willing to see past what powerful beings said was inevitable and imagine what could be chosen instead. Samael looked at Adriel, at the markings covering his skin, at the way light and darkness moved through him in patterns that suggested music or mathematics, or some combination of both. "What are you now?" "The same thing I've always been." Adriel's voice was steady now, certain in a way Inez had never heard before. "Nephilim, abomination, contradiction, but no longer at war with myself." He looked at Inez with such naked gratitude it made her chest ache. "She didn't fix me. She just made it possible for me to stop trying to fix myself." "The court won't accept this," Samael said, but there was no threat in it anymore, just statement of fact. "Then the court can come talk to the witnesses about it," Inez said. "Or they can accept that free will means sometimes humans choose things that make heaven uncomfortable. Either way, we're done pretending we need permission to exist as we are." Samael studied them both for a long moment, and something almost like respect crossed his features. "You know what you've done tonight? You've created precedent. Every Nephilim, every being caught between worlds, every creature that's been told to choose or die, they'll see what you've done and demand the same option." "Good," Adriel and Inez said simultaneously. The angel almost smiled. Then his form dissolved into light that scattered like starlight through the kitchen windows, and he was gone. Inez and Adriel stood in the wreckage of her kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes and spilled coffee, and the evidence of a night that had reshaped reality. Dawn was breaking for real now, pale light filtering through the curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny galaxies. "So," Inez said after a moment, "what happens now?" Adriel took her hand, and the contact no longer burned or froze. It just felt right, like pieces finding their place. "Now we live with the consequences. The court will eventually respond. Other entities will test whether the precedent applies to them. Your life will never be safe or simple, or anything resembling normal." "That's not really selling it. But," he continued, and his mismatched eyes held hers with an intensity that felt like coming home, "you'll never face it alone. You'll have someone who understands contradiction from the inside, who can teach you to weaponize your gift instead of suppressing it, who's waited 200 years to finally be chosen, not in spite of what he is, but because of it." Inez thought about the futures Samael had shown her. The safe one where she grew old in comfortable denial, the dangerous one where she died young but lived fully, and this third option, the one they'd created together, which would probably be both and neither, and something entirely new. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good." Adriel pulled her closer, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heart, felt the way light and darkness pulsed through him in perfect synchronization. Terror means you understand the stakes, but you chose anyway. That's not bravery. That's something rarer. That's faith that love can exist in spaces between certainty and chaos. Outside, the world continued turning, ignorant of the small revolution that had occurred in a kitchen, in a house protected by a dead woman's conviction that love mattered. More than law. Somewhere, cosmic powers were debating implications. Somewhere, other broken things were beginning to hope. But here, in this moment, Inez Santos held a creature that shouldn't exist, and felt for the first time in her life like she'd finally stopped running from the truth of what she was. "No more pills," she said. "No more hiding," he agreed. "No more pretending the world is simpler than it is. No more choosing amputation over wholeness." They stood there as dawn fully broke. Two contradictions choosing each other, writing an ending that looked suspiciously like a beginning. In the end, Inez didn't choose safety or certainty. She chose truth, even when truth looked like a creature the universe itself rejected. She chose love that demanded she see wholeness in what everyone else called broken. And maybe that's the question we all have to answer eventually, isn't it? When faced with something or someone that doesn't fit into the neat categories the world insists upon, do we demand they change to make us comfortable? Or do we have the courage to say that maybe, just maybe, the categories were wrong all along? What would you have done in that kitchen, with an angel offering you normal life and a Nephilim offering you war? Would you have chosen the comfortable lie or the dangerous truth? Because here's what this story is really about. It's about every person who's been told they're too much or not enough, too broken to be loved as they are, too complicated to be accepted without conditions. It's about refusing to amputate parts of yourself to fit into boxes designed by people who've never had to choose between authenticity and survival. Inez looked at 2 centuries of cosmic law and said no. There's a third option, one where we stop asking people to diminish themselves and start expanding our capacity to love what we don't fully understand. That's not fantasy. That's the most radical, most human thing we can do. So if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that love without demand for conformity is possible, if it gave you permission to stop trying to fix what was never broken in the first place, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they don't have to choose between being themselves and being loved. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories about the brave, the broken, and the ones who refuse to let powerful voices define what's possible. And remember, the most dangerous thing you can do in a world that demands simplicity is to choose wholeness instead. Thank you for listening. Now go write your own third option.